Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Skutle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. Click subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, Good Pods. Basically, anywhere you listen to podcasts, the Sonic Cinema Podcast is there. We've had a lot of really great discussions in the past couple of years, and I'm looking forward to adding this one to that list. I've been looking forward to this discussion for a long time. You can also check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There you will find series like Leaving the Collection, like Life Soundtrack, as well as First Watch, just brief little overviews of what I've watched for the first time as far as older movies, early access. There's some things about my music that are interesting on there, and that's at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. We are still in the month of horror, so I will go ahead and use this time once again to plug my horror-inspired album, The Cold Wind of Horror, available on Bandcamp. And you can use the promo code HORRORMUSIC for 15% off of your purchase from now until November 3rd. And then also, you will be able to purchase all my discography at Bandcamp for 35% off, and that is at Bandcamp. So we are going to go in a slightly different direction than we normally do with horror this year. We're not going to do a traditional 3-movie sort of anniversary type segment like we have in the past couple of years. We talked about Dracula earlier this month, the different iterations of Dracula. And this time we're going to be discussing a horror from Vietnamese filmmakers. And this is a topic very near and dear to my guest's heart. And it's part of the reason, one of the reasons I was so excited to have him on was because of the fact that he is extremely passionate about getting people more exposed to Vietnamese cinema, in part because he is from Vietnam in himself, and he is a fantastic film critic and writer who actually we'll talk about where you can find his work, but he's had some very exciting opportunities come up in the past few months, and I'd like to take this time to introduce my guest, Wen Lei. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, hello, or as we like to say it in Vietnamese, xin chào mọi người. So yeah, it's an honor to be here, and very much appreciate the kind words.
I've like with pretty much a lot of my guests, fellow critic guests. I've known you on Twitter mainly, but also other social media for a few years now. And so I've wanted to have you on the podcast. And I know that some of our mutual friends, you've been on with some of our mutual friends, and that got me even more excited about having you on here. And one of the things that I like to try to do, especially if I'm bringing somebody on, I like to talk to them about something that's very passionate to them, something that interests them. And we'll get into more of that, but because this is your first time on the podcast, I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to the audience, and what is it about film that has inspired you over the years to want to write about it and talk about it?
Well, Brian, I have to say that I think my journey into film, I have been told it's quite unusual, but in a good way, not like in any nefarious way or anything. So don't y'all get any ideas. But the thing is, so long story short, my family, they are actually, I would call them like cinephiles or like very intense film goers. However, there's only one specific kind of film that they wouldn't venture, mainly because of the language barrier, is that it's called English speaking films. Now, I would say that I've been privileged and fortunate enough to, receive a foreign language education, and the fact that I also turned out to be adept at it as well. So, I just thought that, maybe I can use that to quote unquote alleviate that particular obstacle for them, so to speak. So one fine day, I can't remember the movie, but I just asked the adults in the house to like, okay, so you want to watch this Hollywood movie, right? So how about you just put the DVD into the player, just press play and turn on the English subtitles, and then I'll just translate the words on the screen straight into your ears. I'll sit right next to you and I'll do that. So one film became 10, and 10 film became 100, and now I think it's around two 12, 15 films already. But yeah, so it got to a point where now if you talk to my dad, my mom, my sister, my uncle, and my aunt, I mean, if you talk to them about Blade Runner 2049, they will know what it is, basically. But and also, the byproduct of from that activity is that, I have to watch a film multiple times in order to, like get the translations right, finding the equivalence of, certain linguistic nuances, or, colloquial expressions, and, so on and so forth, just to make sure that my translations are, quality and correct and precise, basically. So, by what and the pie and the byproduct of that is that I have to I get to understand a little bit more about, why is this frame this way, or why is the choice of the music at that part was like so, or, why this line of dialogue here is like a double entendre or foreshadowing, so on and so forth. So basically, like, I can do some like preliminary analysis of the film already from the hobby, that from my hobby. And so, yeah, I think that's how I got into writing about films. And also, just I guess just a little thing about me is just that I feel that I express myself better in writing rather than speaking. And also, I have major stage fright, so writing helps.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm with you as far as we're on podcast right now, and I've had this podcast going on for about 9 years, but to a certain extent, I do still feel like I myself express myself easier through writing more than the spoken word.
Right?
I mean, I think
Right.
part of that is because of the fact that obviously you can take your time with what you're writing down, whereas, especially in a discussion like this, it's more stream of thought, going from one thought to another. But, in trying to keep all of those thoughts going, it's easier for me to focus on what I'm writing about than, sometimes if you're speaking, you're going to lose sight of like where you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And also, again, the fact that, English is my second language. So, let's take this instant example. So, every single time that every single time that you speak, I actually translate all of what you said in my head first, and then to prepare an answer, I also have to translate that answer from Vietnamese to English before I can deliver it to you. It's a whole process, but it happens so fast now. Yeah, sometimes I don't, I won't be even aware that it's happening, but it does. That's how it does. That's how it happens, basically. So,
So you're currently, I know you recently moved back to Vietnam from
correct.
America.
Houston, Texas. So,
What is I'm sure you could list hundreds upon hundreds of differences between uh, living in America, especially in Texas, versus living in Vietnam. But what are some of, specifically focusing in on movie going and movie watching? What
mhm.
are some what are some of the biggest differences between American audiences and Vietnamese audiences in terms of how they watch movies that you've noticed?
Oh, now this is a fascinating question because I haven't had to think about this in English yet. I have been asked this, but I haven't had to think about it in another language. So let's see. Well, let's just try to get this out of the way. I myself don't like to beat around the bush so much. But first thing first is that the etiquette,
Yeah.
the etiquette is very very different. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes the cinema etiquette in the U.S. is not, it's not that ideal either. But then, you have certain measures in place to make sure that, quote unquote, people get in line.
Right.
However, in Vietnam, it's almost like a laissez-faire kind of situation. I have attended premieres or press screenings where, oh, here premieres are also press screenings.
Okay.
So yeah, so premieres slash press screenings here, sometimes people just go ahead and pull out their phones. I can actually read some of the Facebook message or the Instagram post that they write every single word.
Yeah.
So so and also because we like to watch. Here we have a concept called almost like a figure of speech. So we have a concept called like phim Thai, as in like Western films, as in just films from overseas.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be a US film. It can be a film from UK,
Yeah.
but doesn't matter. We just lump it all together as in a Western film. So uh, we like to watch that a lot, and then we are very, 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 did I say very, very dependent on the Vietnamese subtitles that are provided with the film, that are burned into the footage as
Mm-hmm.
well. And also because I am a translator and subtitler on the side, or whenever I have free time, I do notice that the quality of the subtitles, it can be hit or miss.
Mm-hmm.
So usually, because a lot of people here, they have to watch the movie and they are dependent on the subtitles, you can you can hear a lot of whispers, audible whispers in the auditorium that are like, "Babe, what just happened? I don't get it. Like, could you tell me what could you tell me what happened, or like who is this guy, or something like that." So it's very interesting in that sense. And another thing that I can say that is pretty different between cinema going in the US and cinema going in Vietnam is that um, we we do love to support films from our country. We do love to support Vietnamese films made by our very own people. But the ecosystem, or in a sense, the resources available for us to make a film where people can support, and they realize that their investment, their mental investment, their support, their showing up for it is worthwhile. Sometimes it doesn't. There's no payoff, and there can be a lot of debates. There can be a lot of anger in the media or in the discourse afterwards. So I mean, a lot of people, they just say that that is just a c'est la vie, like a way of life kind of thing. But then to me, it's just something that when you write about Vietnamese films, you still have to put that, let's just call it limitation for now. You have to put that limitation into consideration, because otherwise most of your criticisms about Vietnamese films are just going to be unpleasant and negative, because you will automatically compare the craft or the filmmaking of a Vietnamese film to a film from the West, and that's not a level playing field, and that makes your criticism questionable in that sense, because you did factor in the certain limitations that you have, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. I mean, and the thing is, it's like hearing you talk about that, and we can go ahead and start to pivot into Vietnamese cinema in general. And it's one of those things where the only comparison I would have in terms of the West is, comparing something produced by the major studio versus something that somebody basically had to crowdfund to get money for, or basically just had to max out their credit cards to get money for, and they didn't necessarily have the same resources to do proper sound mixing or maybe coloring, or and so sometimes the sound can be a bit rough, or the image is not quite as strong as it is. But it's like, for me, watching a film like that, the most important thing for me is the story. So long as you get what you're trying to convey in this story, I can forgive a lot of technical qualities in a film. If there are some technical qualities that are lacking, I'm willing to overlook, technical issues in a film, so long as you tell me a story that's engaging, so long as you tell me a story that you're clearly passionate about and engage and hooks me in. And I think there's a lot of people who, and I do think that it's, we're at a point, you've no doubt seen it on Twitter constantly. It's like we're at a point where media literacy and the ability to look at film and appreciate films for what they're saying thematically, for what they're saying emotionally, is an all-time low. I
Right.
almost feel like it is. And so yeah, if you're just unable to just look past some faults, and some movies have no excuse. If they cost like a couple millions of dollars, you expect the best product out there. But if you're, it's easy in that case to see people cutting corners and not making as good product as they can. But it's one of those things where it's like I think a lot of people, they expect every movie to look the same way the big studios make it, and that's not necessarily fair to the people who don't have the resources of a major studio to make a film.
Right, right. I mean, so right now, Vietnamese cinema, or the like the topic that we're specifically focusing on today, like Vietnamese horror cinema. I noticed that nowadays, since the country, we have open our doors a little bit in terms of like what can be filmed, or kind of uh, what kind of images or messages that we can convey. We are more quote unquote flexible on that front right now. So I would say that it's booming. There is growth. There is growth here, but as you've said, it is growing in a time where appreciation is actually, or the art of appreciating cinema, it is in decline or at an all-time low. So that is something that has been on my mind for a little while, because it's almost like you have just finished a very tough program at university, and you are about to enter a job market that is not as robust as you think.
Yeah.
So I feel like you know uh, oh, it's a little bit, maybe what I'm saying is a little bit pessimistic, but I like to say that the optimistic part of that pessimistic assessment is just that it's not set in stone yet.
No.
It is still very uncertain. So, I would say maybe if we just keep on doing our thing, keep on staying our course, and who knows, maybe tomorrow is going to be it's going to be a totally different scenario than what you imagined today. So
Hmm.
I don't know, but right now it's just like it's a very funny situation that is going on here. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. You were talking about how it does seem that Vietnamese cinema is starting to open up more.
mhm.
Was there so I will admit that I am not well versed in Vietnamese cinema. Um and that's part of but that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you. It's part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this subject, because I know from reading your work just how passionate you are about getting people engaged with Vietnamese cinema.
Right.
And you've talked about the industry in terms of how it's started to grow over the decades and how it's starting to expand now. Um, if you could give us a little bit of an overview of what the industry has kind of looked like over the years. And I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be a blow by blow, like, oh, it doesn't, obviously, you don't
Okay.
have to go through whole extent of Vietnamese film history, but just a rough overview as to how it is starting to expand in recent years.
Okay. And I'm also gonna try to talk about this, but with orientation toward the horror scene in Vietnam,
Okay,
if that's okay.
that is
All
perfectly
right.
fine.
All right. So, for the longest time, the horror genre is actually one of the most difficult thing for filmmakers or creatives here in Vietnam in general to tackle, strictly because when we have a horror material on hand, we really have to consider the fact that we won't be able to tap into the horrific elements that the cinematically horrific elements that we want to tell, simply because here as written in the film laws, is that we have to ensure that the artistic content that we are delivering to you, the film goer, it has to value truth, goodness, and beauty. And also, it is very, very, very well specified in the film law is that the art shall not include any content that is about uh, the supernatural or superstition or elements about the aforementioned two, that could cause chaos and incite the public to be to live in fear, something like that. So um, so it's just so sometimes, if we are to include elements of the supernatural in horror films here, we have to, at one point, usually the ending, we have to make sure that the elements are in somebody's head. They are just dreams, or they are just somebody pulling a prank on the somebody pulling a prank on the characters. So sometimes, in order to go around that, to avoid violating the law, or seeing your film being cut to bits, that at the end of the day it's not your baby anymore. So we tend to address the supernatural in comedies. And the weird thing is that, the funnier your film is, the more horrific your images can be. so if you want to watch some of the most, thus far, some of the most horrific, at that time, if you want to watch some of the most horrific horror imagery that our creatives can cook up, you have to watch a comedy.
That that
And
is that is fascinating.
yeah, so basically, in other words, the more serious your film is, the not scarier it will be. So, and then, if I'm being a little bit more professional and serious, it's just like, you start out the project, uh, with a horror vision, but then your final product is only going to be a very good thriller.
Okay.
But sometimes that is not what you want.
Right.
So, but as I've mentioned, that we are opening up a little bit, and that thing, the opening up thing, it happened because in around, I think, not not so long ago, recently. Let me try and remember. In around 2016 or 2017, I would say maybe 2017, because it happened late in, like, on the eve of on the eve of 2017. So yeah, let's just go with that. So 2017, Vietnam finally implemented a film rating system.
Okay.
So by following that, we can actually, we being like the creatives and the censorship board as well, both of them can actually have a better idea of the kind of film that they want to make, and the kind of imagery, or the kind of content that they are going to be showcasing in the material. So it's still young, and it's still a work in process. It's still a work in progress. There are still debates about it, but at least now there is something that will provide a much, shall we say, standards, in terms of, like, what can we do, what can we insert, what can we show to you.
Right.
uh like, we're going to show this certain themes or certain images, and we know that it's going to land us into this rating system. So you see, there's specificity in that, as opposed to before, where we're going to show you these images and we're going to show you these themes, but they're going to be dependent on the person who is going to censor your film.
Okay.
So, you know, uh, basically, what I'm trying to say is that maybe, rating system are like a blank face, like a standard, like neutral-ish, as opposed to like you are dependent on the mood of a person on that day, the or the I don't know, the experiences of a censor that day, or the
Right.
fact that the censor that will approve your content maybe will not be the person who is going to be deciding the fate of your film out in theaters. So it's just there are standards, and
Right.
there are things that we can a more solid board where we can pin things on,
Okay.
so to speak.
All right. So it sounds so based on what you just said about, your ring system over there. As you
Mm-hmm.
well know, we have our own absolutely chaotic rating system over in the States
Right.
that's basically completely messed up at this point. Probably should be redone entirely, and just maybe not as prudish as it seems to be. Um,
Really,
it's not.
I actually thought that when we decided to implement a rating system here, I was just like, yes, I'm so glad we are following the MPAA's rule. But now you're saying that it's imperfect.
Here's what I was going to say. So it sounds like you guys are basically you're basically at that point over in Vietnam where you're going from the production code that was in place in Hollywood in from the 30s to the 50s, which really
Right.
did center around censorship of making sure things were presented a certain way, to the early start of the MPAA in the 60s and the rating system. It's taken decades for the MPAA to get to the point where it is now, which is
Right.
basically an absurdity in a lot of ways. The fact that they basically count sexuality on a much more stricter scale than they do violence, and it's just it. I wrote about it 25 years ago in college, and it was a disaster then. But no, and the thing is, what I find interesting, especially, and we can go ahead and start talking about Vietnamese horror and talking about the films that I watched for this in particular. What's interesting about that is you talked about the supernatural, how you had to present the supernatural in a very specific way, and that's really only started to. It seems like that's only started to shift in the past few years as you've gone towards a rating system. What's interesting is that all three of these movies that you sent my way are before 2017, and all three deal with the supernatural in very, very traditional terms, in terms of the tropes and the ideas behind the supernatural.
Right.
So I guess my biggest question is, how did the filmmakers of movies like Spirits and Hollow and Vengeful Hearts, how did they work around the restrictions at the time when it came to supernatural to tell the stories that they did?
Perfect. Perfect question. Thank you for asking. So, but before I go into answering your question, I would like to preface two things. Spirits and Vengeful Heart, they're from the same director,
Yes.
and all three films are actually directed by Vietnamese Americans.
Okay.
or Americans of Vietnamese descent.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
uh, and yes. So how did they all get around that? Because if you notice in all three films, the uh, there is a very one of the core components of all the film's narrative is that it is something called I'd like to call it like karmic justice,
Mm-hmm.
as in like if you do good then you get then you receive goodness, and if you do wicked then you receive wickedness.
Right.
That is essentially the, I think, a thematic summation of the stories in all the three films that you watch.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I would definitely agree with that. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Also, especially for the films Hollow and Vengeful Heart, and this is also in some way connected to the karmic justice thing as well. Their third act always revolves around, crime and punishment, and obviously you will get punished for your crimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That
So
is.
that is something, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is something that our culture really likes to promote, really likes to encourage. Uh, through different forms of messaging, through different forms of media as well. We always emphasize that point, is that you should do well, and you should be. This is a civilized society, so you should act accordingly, act with civility, to be specific. So it's the third acts of those two films, Vengeful Heart and Hollow. They are representative of that.
That does make a lot of sense. That really does make a
Mm-hmm.
lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, it was something that was very I was definitely very aware of. Where it's like
Mm-hmm.
as I was watching the movies, and it's like you do very much. It is very much a
Like there
this
is a morality lesson that you
yeah,
can learn from these supernatural cinematic experiences. It's not just simply a scare fest
yes,
that are that are a lot of films in Hollywood, let's call it that, do that, and
mm-hmm.
also another thing that I like to mention is that, again, especially for a Hollow and Vengeful Heart, the evil will never win.
Mm-hmm.
The goodness prevails, basically.
Yeah,
So here's a funny thing that here's a funny story that I just remembered by saying that. Talk to me. But first, before I go into any deeper, talk to me. How did you find that film, Brian? If you've seen it.
I'll be honest. I have not yet seen it. I have not
Oh,
had a
okay.
chance to see it. I'm behind on a lot of horror movies, sadly, this year.
All right, no worries, no worries. I'm just asking in order to know like how much could I speak about it, but still having you, intrigued, instead of feeling like, oh wait, my podcast guest just spoiled it for me. So okay, I guess since you haven't seen it, I'll deliver to you the short version of it. So the ending of Talk to Me, when it's here in Vietnam, it's actually altered.
Hmm.
There have been alterations made to the point where I ask a lot of people who have seen it. They just say that I absolutely do not get the third act of Talk to Me. so, so I know that something is up, and I know that it has quote unquote violated some of the shall we say, measures or policies, even that I have mentioned to you
Okay.
before. So I just decided that, okay, if I'm going to see Talk to Me, I guess I'm going to, maybe travel to Thailand or Singapore or Indonesia in order to see the quote unquote director's cut version
Right.
of Talk to Me. Which I did, by the way. I did, I did go, I did travel to Singapore to visit a relative, and then I just used my free time in order to see Oppenheimer, Barbie, which is banned in Vietnam completely, and Talk to Me, which had its ending altered in Vietnamese theaters. So, so yeah,
Wow.
pretty. I mean, pretty interesting. I hope.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah. Having to go to a completely different country just to watch a movie in its original form. Yeah, I mean
What do you
it's
mean, director's cut?
oh
Wink,
okay.
wink.
Yeah, got it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, over in America, all we have to do is just spam a studio for years with a particular hashtag to get them to pony up $70 million to make that happen.
Right. I don't know which film managed to do that. I
Yeah,
don't know. I have no
I
idea.
it escapes me right now. But
Mm.
anyway, let's switch back to the subject at hand. Um, I so the three films that you sent me were all on YouTube because they're not really available in the United States. I think that is, and it's wild because of the fact that it's like that one of the things that streaming has theoretic or the purveyors of streaming mentality have theoretically promised us is that everything is available. And of course, anybody who is, conscious of, that knows that that is not true. And it is saying something that, when we were talking about this and you were working on suggestions for me to watch, that all three of these films ended up on YouTube, not in any official manner, and not necessarily in the best quality. But you know, but the thing is, it's like I am glad that we do have people who are willing to make movies like this available. And I was captivated by all three of these films. I really found them all fascinating. And you know, you know, even though I haven't seen a whole lot, even though I hadn't seen Vietnamese horror um, before these films, I had seen some Asian horror. So it's like there are some tropes in these films that are familiar if you've seen stuff like The Grudge or Ring You or and uh, other Asian horror. But
Dark
the
Water.
right, but the thing is, it's like I think it is that sense of morality, that sense of karmic justice that plays throughout these films that, and especially the last two, but I think it's in spirits as well. And I think that, but that one, I have some issues with one particular part of that one. We can talk about it a bit later, but it's like I'm not quite sure how I feel about that one. But I mean, it certainly ties in well with the idea of karmic justice in all three of these films.
Hmm.
So when did you first watch these films?
My gosh. Um, well, first of all, I would like to say I apologize for, sending you YouTube links to watch representatives of the genre from our
Right.
country, but at the same time, there is no other freaking way to, see
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So,
We do what we can.
it's yes, exactly.
I understand.
I was about to say it is a legitimate we make do kind of
Yeah.
situation. And that is also by saying that, I would also like to share that is exactly the most horror-like, the most horrific aspect for me. My own horror story regarding, writing about the sorry, writing about Vietnamese cinema or, Vietnamese horror. It's just that, I may write something that is very intriguing for you to read, but let's just say that you're my editor. You read it, and then you ask me, um, this is very fascinating, Win. Where can I see this? And I have no answer for you.
Yeah.
So, and now because you can't see it, there is a chance, and there tends to be, and that tends to happen. It's just that, is Wayne writing a lot of baloney here? Like, is he making this film more fascinating than it is? Or is he like writing an entirely new treatment here for me to see in terms of, and in the form of reporting? So, you have doubts because you can't access the film in order to see it for yourself, or like it is too damn hard in order to, get access to it. So it is something that, with me being here right now, and me with the experience that I have amassed, I'm trying to change that.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm trying to let local creatives think that, just because they have always been making films that satisfy local audiences, that is not the limit. They can do so much more. Their creative product can be so much more. Their creative product can actually reach out to audiences beyond Vietnam.
Yeah.
And it's or if I'm being more harsh, and if I'm being harsher and I'm actually being blunt about it, I would like to say that, your film, you are actually shortening its life and its reach before it could see its life in full, or before it could realize its entire reach,
Yeah.
basically. So anyway, enough of my, I have vented. Thank you so much, Brian.
No problem.
Uh, so the thing about the Spirits is that, and Spirits is the first film, is my introduction to Vietnamese horror. And I know the film is made in 2004, which would make next year being its 20th anniversary. I hope I get to write something about it. Um, I I first saw Spirits, I think around, whoa, like 20, 2008, 2009 or something like that. I don't know how my cousin acquired the DVD for it. I'm not going to ask, but yeah. Uh, but that was, that was the most, I think that was one of the more fascinating cinema going experiences that, oh, film watching, sorry, it wasn't shown in theaters. It was one of the more interesting film watching experiences that I've ever had in my life up to that point, because, I never thought that, I would live to see a Vietnamese horror film, or a horror film that is predominantly in the Vietnamese language, basically.
Hmm.
Um, Now I know the case for Spirits is actually pretty interesting, because in some ways it is a more, if you have to be really granular and specific about it, Spirits is a more Vietnamese American kind of film, as opposed to a Vietnamese film. Because just an interesting factoid, that entire film was filmed in a in a backyard of a home in Santa Ana, California.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. So so we have a kind of like a scent of the green papaya situation, where the Vietnam that you see is actually recreated from memories, and created in an environment that is, to be as straightforward as possible, not Vietnam.
Hmm.
Scent of the Green Papaya, the entire thing was filmed on a soundstage in France. A lot of people were surprised when I say that to them, but
Yeah.
that's what it is. So, but the thing about Spirits is that, and this is also what distinguishes it from the other two films, even though Vengeful Heart, as I've mentioned, is from the same director as Spirits. Did you notice that the ghosts or the apparitions in Spirits are actually way scarier than the other two films?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the fact that they are portrayed and they are edited, or they are framed in a way that you can never say that it's in the character's head,
Right.
or it is just a character under the influence and then they see things.
Mm-hmm.
It is real. It is it,
Yeah.
basically. So yeah, that was my introduction to Vietnamese horror, and yeah, it wasn't perfect, I have to say, because the Vietnamese spoken in that film from the cast, uh, it's not perfect Vietnamese, but then at the same time, I really, really, really appreciate them for trying. Like,
Mm-hmm.
big points on that.
Well, that's interesting that, it was filmed in California. That's interesting. And it makes me kind of wonder, it almost kind of makes me wonder if some of the things that film accomplishes might be a byproduct of the fact that it was filmed in America as opposed to being filmed in Vietnam. Um,
Hmm.
but yes, you can definitely see that it is made on very sparse, limitations in terms of budget, in terms of resources. But the thing is, it's like I think when the movie is going towards the supernatural, or when the movie is going towards uh, looking to make you take notice and really feel unsettled, it really does accomplish that. I love the, some of the, when it seems like whenever it takes place during the day is when you can see the limitations the most. When it takes place, when they film at night, when it takes place at night, that's where the filmmaker's able to bring in that less is more aesthetic, and using shadows and using atmosphere and using lighting to really get under her skin in a lot of ways. And I love, and the thing that I love so much about Spirits more than any of them is the structure. I love that this is very much it's an anthology in the sense that all three of it's three separate stories, but all three stories are part of the same larger narrative. It's just
Right.
different timelines, and I in that narrative, and I really love that about the movie.
Right. So maybe again a hot take. Uh, you thought that Christopher Nolan's structure for Dunker is cool? I'm sorry, Victor Vu has done it before in Spirits. So, all right. Well, I think they're gonna like beginning to. I'm gonna receive like scary DMs, and maybe this person has blocked you on Twitter or something like that from here. And I'm sorry, Brian.
It is what it is. It's fine. I have no personal vested interest in anything that happens on Twitter now. So it's like, I'm. It's like I peruse it and that's it. If somebody blocks me on there,
Right.
hey, you know what? That's on them. So,
Right.
but yeah. So So the story of spirits is basically about a man, an author, who comes to a he's a drifter at the beginning of the movie. He comes into a house
Right.
at night, uh, caretaken by a young woman who lets him stay there, and there's a supernatural twist in there, and we find out what it is, and it's very evocative. And one of the things that I really liked about that is that it gets to something about him, but also opens up a larger mystery that we're going to start to see unfold in the other two sections as well.
Hmm.
And then we go, and then the second, so that is The Visitor. The second one is Only Child, where the man is now in, it seems like he is he in an institution? It sort of seems like he's supposed to be in an institution, but he's seen by a doctor, and the doctor, he falls in love with his nurse, and the nurse falls in love with him, and their relationship is very rocky, and we find out there's might be some otherworldly reasons for that as well. And I definitely want to come back to that because that's the part of the film that I think really left me with the most pause. But it's still fascinating in the way it presents things. And then we get to The Diviner, where the nurse has passed away, and this is years after they've been married, and the author is still alive, and a psychic has basically been brought in by the family to try to get answers for the woman's death, and
Right.
we see how that unfolds. And I love that there's almost a different, you were talking about how sometimes the scariest things at the time, the way to present horror elements, horror images in Vietnamese horror, in Vietnamese cinema for a long time was through comedy. The thing that I find interesting in this is that each story here, it's all rooted in the supernatural, it's all rooted in horror tropes, but they almost take very different genres in approaching that. And I think that's one of the things I'm so fascinated about with this film.
So, in a way, to continue off your point, I guess in a way, what makes our being like a Vietnam or of Vietnamese descent, what makes our horror stories so special is just that because of the limitations that we face, because of mainly the limitations that we face. So because of them, we can actually approach fear in a way that is very tender or very evocative, to a perfect word that you use, by the way, Brian. So in some ways, would that make us like quote unquote ahead of the curve a little bit in terms of how nowadays, especially like the films of or the films of the series from Mike Flanagan,
Yeah.
where it actually does a really good, those films, his films, they do a really good job in showing you that sometimes the most horrific thing that you can experience, or sometimes the scariest apparition in the genre, is actually your sadness.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me, it seems like it's a notion that is only popular recently, as opposed to like way back around the years that Spirits was made, or Hollow was made even. So I don't know. That's a good. I think that's a good question That's a good place for me to place a question mark, and that is also a good question that maybe I should be exploring.
Well, and the thing is, it's like you know, my and the thing I love about I'll admit I've not watched Mike Flanagan's series. I don't always have a lot of time for series. So unfortunately, I have not seen any of them, but I really want to because I think Flanagan is a tremendous filmmaker as far as horror. But I mean, the thing is like there are I think to a certain extent that's going back to there are times in the past in horror and like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and I think especially in the films produced by Val Lewton in the 40s, you can kind of
Hmm.
see that element of emotional aspect and tenderness coming through in something like Cat People or I Walked with a
Mm.
Zombie, along with the supernatural elements of it. And I mean, especially in even the sequel to Cat People, which I really think is quite an underrated film in the Val Lewton series that he produced. Um, you really do get a sense that there's a sense of humanity towards the people that this horror is being felt by, and
Right.
I think that is that's I mean so I think in a way that's probably where Flanagan is coming from. And I mean you can see it in movies like Doctor's Sleep and even Gerard's Game. You can kind of see it to a certain extent.
Yeah. I mean, that is true. But then at the same time, I would say that the films and the filmmakers that you have cited, they get to how should I say it? They can have more freedom in
Mm-hmm.
exploring how horror can be emotional, and at the same time they can go to they can make said emotions way more intense than Vietnamese filmmakers can,
Yeah.
because we can only reach to a certain point before we get receive a tap on the shoulder from the censors. So so, and I mean, I have talked to creatives here, and they said that, um, they do realize that sometimes the things that, the one thing that they have to, uh, devote their resources, mentally and physically to, in terms of developing a horror project, is the workaround as opposed
Right.
to what they actually
Right.
want to say.
Right.
so so yeah, it's a very interesting situation for a
Yeah.
creative, as in, because as much as I am on the camp of, limitations to an artist can actually entertain and excite their creativity more, but at the same time, that very notion that I believe doesn't seem to bode very well for uh, Vietnamese filmmakers, and especially, Vietnamese horror filmmakers.
Right.
So, it forces me to think a lot.
Oh no, and I can because I mean there's yeah I mean one of my favorite filmmakers of all time is Andrei Tarkovsky, and I mean I adore his work, but you also I- based also on me studying about what he went through in as a filmmaker in Soviet Russia, um, he struggled to get what he wanted to say, and he's somebody who's very he's almost in a way he's almost I mean it's been said by other people, especially when it comes to 2001: A Space Odyssey versus Tarkovsky's Solaris. He's almost the more humanist individual equivalent to Kubrick, who's very chill.
Right.
But Tarkovsky, I mean, you can see in his films there's a center around the individual and the responsibility of the individual that to be a person unto himself that just flies completely in the face of what the USSR wanted. And so that's why Tarkovsky ended up making his last two films outside of Russia, because of the fact that he just was not able to say what he wanted to say under those restrictions. And the thing is, it's like when you have talked about the limitations of artists, you know, at least before they started to get into the before they started to implement a rating system, that makes my issues with Only Child and Spirits makes more sense to me why it had to be portrayed this way. So in Only Child, and we are going to get into some spoilers here, the nurse is unable to in a way that the nurse is really unable to give the author the life that he wants, which includes children, for a long time. And we come to learn that she is haunted by the fact that she has had several abortions over the years. And that just that sense of the loss of innocent life basically follows her to where when she does have a child on her own, it is born with deformities. And I'll admit, when I first watched the film, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, wow, this is very pro-life propaganda when it comes to being against abortion. I was still fascinated by it, but it's like, I'm not sure how I feel about that. But hearing you talk about the fact that it's like, well, you know, you have to, under the restrictions of censors, it has to do with something karmic justice. If you do something good, you're rewarded. You do something bad, you're punished. It does, as uncomfortable as it makes me to admit that, it does fit within that perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally get your reasoning, you know, but at the same time, that is very much a reflection of our culture.
Yeah.
Of especially in terms of the collectivistic nature of it, you know,
Right.
As in like we there are certain bonds that we cannot or should not or shall not sever. And, you know, a mother and that between a mother and a child is one such thing. So yeah, I can see and I understand why you would find it troubling, but
the thing is, it
at the same time, it's just exactly
it works with
right.
the context of the film. It really
right.
does. So
right.
Yeah,
and but it is. But you know, I mean, it could be a topic that is one of the topics that you know, worth diving into if you know I get to you know explore about this film, like, you know, looking back 20 years, what did you think of this element? And you know, so thank you for that. Thank you for incepting that idea in my head. Brian. So thank you for that.
Oh, no problem. And but the thing is, it's like I one thing I will say about that is that I think I think to a certain extent it's like um that is the contract that I think film goers go into when it comes to watching movies from cultures from countries that are not their own. We and that is where is valuable for us to do so. And I think and so and that's and the fact that was the fact that based on what you were saying about the restrictions that filmmakers had when it came to horror, it again, it makes all the sense in the world in the context of this film. That's why that happens the way it happens. And the thing is, it's like there is a sense of grief, there is a sense of isolation in all of these stories in spirits. And I think that's one of the things that does, as uncomfortable as it made me, work to this film's advantage as far as making that sense of isolation palpable to the audience.
I'm glad it produces that effect on you. And yeah, I think at the same time, I feel like I'm not the most qualified person to discuss that particular aspect any
Right.
further. However, I could say that maybe, perhaps, we could also interpret it as, it being a horrific thing to her only because she has made it so,
Yeah.
basically. Because I think that's also an element that on subsequent watches of the film, it is something that I only realized then. It's just that a lot of the fears that that Vietnamese characters in horror films they tend to encounter are, beasts of their own making.
Yeah.
On one hand that lines up with uh, being able to avoid censorship because it is imagined, but at the same time it is also, if you do it right, if you portray it with care, then you can actually produce a very I think a very evocative
Yes.
kind of horror.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and it taps into psychological horror, which is always one of the more fascinating subgenres of horror in general. I mean, it's like but yeah, I mean, even with those elements that make me almost uncomfortable, and almost especially because they make me uncomfortable, I found spirits to be absolutely fascinating, and this and it really, especially knowing what you've told me about the film industry, it makes so much more sense that why the film had those elements portrayed in the way they did. And I was just I found myself so fascinated. And the thing, I was talking, the quality of the YouTube clip or the YouTube link unfortunately was not very good. It looked like somebody who just didn't necessarily know how to compress the video quality that well. But ultimately speaking, the movie engaged me because I mean,
Right.
everything, the narrative engaged me, the stories engaged me, and I found that that's what made that ultimately a rewarding experience for me.
Right. And now that you mention it, I think I have a point that I also like to add as well. And it is something that I think I only realized while I was out and get my drink, was just that Hollow and Vengeful Heart, the two newer films of the three that I recommend to you. Um, do you notice how they're like almost like a rebuttal to in particular the Only Child story in Spirits, in the sense that it is actually it is still showing a very patriarchal society, but then for the narratives of Hollow and Vengeful Heart, that actually has consequences to the patriarchy.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. No, and we can.
So yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
No, and we
So
can.
it is a good. I always want to say that it is a good reflection to show that how consciousness and thinkings have evolved over time,
Right.
because see because it still adheres to that idea about uh reap what you sow. You plant good things, you will get good fruits. You plant wicked things, you get wicked stuff.
Yeah.
But now the dynamics change, the components change
Hmm.
somewhat. So
Yeah, and we can go and head over to Hollow and Vengeful Heart, and both of these were from 2014. And Hollow, I'll admit, I mean, Hollow was jarring for a very different reason. But it plays into that sense of karmic justice, and you are absolutely correct that both of these films really do act in a way as a rebuttal to the patriarchal sensibilities that are kind of on display in Only Child. Uh, Hollow begins with a girl falling into a river, and she's found uh, a few weeks, like a week later, and she is not dead in the sense that we think of, people alive. Turns out that she is she's I don't know. It seems like there's a possession aspect to it. Um,
there is.
and it's funny because of the fact that I actually was looking up the director's filmography as, after I watched it, and it occurred to me that I did actually see one of this filmmaker's other films. I need to. It was from a couple of years ago. Um, was it Micah?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I did get a chance to see that one and review that one. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good film, and so it was interesting to see a his uh, different film of theirs, and really see a different side to his their work in terms of genre. And so
Right.
that was interesting. But and they both are centered around children, but this one much darker. And basically, the older sister who is kind of blamed for the death of the daughter, or is it? Yeah, it's an older sister, right? Yeah,
Yes.
is blamed for the daughter's death. She's you get you get the possession aspect, um, but the way it is presented here, I think, is much more chilling than I think most possession films approach it. And
hmm
the twist of where the possession is coming from and why the possession is happening is fits into that sense of karmic justice in a very
But
unsettling way by what is uncovered as a result of it.
right. And also, you know, I recommend you Hollow is only because, again, like you said, and I was actually waiting for you to say that statement, and then you said it because it was jarring in the sense that in a good way,
Yeah.
as in like it's the style when I first saw it, it was just like this is very different. It doesn't seem to follow any rules, quote
Yeah.
unquote rules that I know. It doesn't seem very. It seems almost like dedicated to unsettle you, like literally, like literally with the visual language that it employs. It does that too.
Mhm.
And then I just thought that, wow, that seems to be pretty bold, considering, when you do that to Vietnamese films or Vietnamese series, you get to receive a lot of complaints. But then here it's just like, I don't give a damn. I am speaking my own visual language. I'm just gonna convey it the way that I feel that it's appropriate, and it works for the film.
It
I mean,
does. Yeah.
regardless of at the end of the day whether you resonate with it or not, whether you find it a good cinematic going experience or not, that's entirely for you.
Yeah.
That's entirely you have your right to hold whatever opinion, but there's one thing you can't deny. It's just that it is different.
Hmm. Well, and the thing is, the style in this movie is extremely strong. I
Right.
love the sense of style in this movie is tremendous, and the way the way the flashbacks are done is extremely well done, and the way it's a credit to the filmmakers that, as dark as the real world implications of this narrative are, they don't feel exploitative. They don't feel like they're done in a way they're done they're done in a way to shock you beyond simply shocking you why as to how somebody could behave the way that the stepfather ends up behaving in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's just, and it's one of those things where um again, it's sort of with like Only Child, it makes you uncomfortable, but it makes you uncomfortable because of the fact that this movie is so much about, you've seen so much about the stepfather, you know, basically a being a beloved person, but also being very domineering when it comes to their family, that you're repulsed by it in the same way that, anybody who finds out about, say, about like in real life Jeffrey Epstein's stuff is
Right.
disturbed by it. And the fact
Mm-hmm.
that, and the way that it's portrayed in here is harrowing, but also not in a way that it's exploiting the horror of what that is, what that would mean in real life.
Right. And I also I also think that another word that is appropriate for hollow is that it uh, it operates at a, how do you say it? What the word just skipped me. Go for broke mindset.
Yeah, yeah,
Does it know that sometimes that maybe it will not work? I believe it does. I
mm-hmm.
believe it does. But then at the same time, it doesn't care. It just wants to
Yeah.
try.
I will.
And I think I might have to give it credit for that, because it was just like, okay, sure, gutsy, but okay,
Yeah,
you are more than willing to do something new, as opposed to just staying, you know, do do it like they've always done. So okay,
and,
sure.
and the thing is, it's like I'm not even sure if I entirely understand the supernatural machinations of the film, but to your point, I don't really care. because the way that the fact that they went for it the way that they did, I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm intrigued and I'm on board with how they're going about it. It's not, it's like, it's how you go about it. It's not whether and I appreciate the fact that they challenged me in that respect. And I
Mm-hmm.
love it.
Yeah, and also I would say that the fact that the Hollow is a good example for from my perspective. Hollow is a good example of uh, when of Vietnamese films in general. They really have one aspect they all need to work on and improve a lot is screenwriting, because
Hmm.
sometimes, most of the time, uh, the writer of the films are the directors themselves.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes because as a director, they are also learning how to make a film under certain conditions within certain parameters in Vietnam as well. The navigating that front alone is already a very taxing like element.
Hmm.
So they have to do that at the same time as they are trying to develop a script or making up a story. So certain wires won't cross, or certain ends won't meet, and sometimes that that is shown on the screen.
Hmm.
I think Hollow, you can see where those places happen, where
Yeah.
the ends don't meet,
Yeah.
or where where certain wires aren't crossed right. But it's but I would say that it is a thing to look into, as opposed it is a thing to comment. It is a thing to criticize, but at the same time, it is also a thing that you kind of want to look into deeper more, rather than just simply make a comment on it and then just move on to the next thing. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's like with horror, there is a long history of films where the style uh, is more dominant to the substance, and the substance doesn't always make a lick of sense. I mean, you look at something like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It's like you could argue that that movie does not really make a lot of sense, but it's one of the towering achievements of silent horror cinema. And I find myself captivated by it every time I watch it. And I mean, Hollow, I think is in the same way, but at the same time, I mean, I you do get, even if the supernatural aspects of it don't completely work, the emotional parts of the film work, and that's what that's ultimately the most important thing of any film that you're watching. If the emotions
mhm.
get you, if the emotional landscape of the story gets you, uh, it doesn't matter what else happens.
Right. And also, I would say that uh, I would also say that in terms of style dominating substance, this could also be, a lot of reviewers have pointed this out too. A lot of audience members, I noticed, and I remember it now. When they point out about when they talk about Hollow, they also point out that maybe the substance is also too Americanized for them, because the character of I think her name, if I remember correctly, her name is Yi, the main the older sister.
Mm-hmm.
She is she is rebellious. She is a teenager. She doesn't really listen to her parents, and so on and so forth. But then her way is very, to me, it has always struck me as, this is a very American teenager.
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
not so much a Vietnamese one, or not so much even like a Vietnamese American teen girl. She is American.
Mm-hmm.
But as it turns out that she only speaks Vietnamese, and she is in a Vietnamese film. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But then, I just thought that, it's really interesting, and it is a very clear indication of, uh, where you can tell kind of like the roots of the vision of the director,
Mm-hmm.
because Ham Tran, he is Vietnamese American, so.
Yeah.
So the things that he brought into this film, maybe certain elements, one could say that it's very much westernized.
Well, and you can also, you could also make the case that that type of characterization, especially in American culture, is something that has become more and more prevalent, where it's like, rebellious teenagers, but also teenagers who end up being the hero in a lot of ways. And being rebellious is what makes them the hero in a lot of ways. I mean, you think about stuff like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You think of stuff like, The Hunger Games. You think about, and, especially in the past 2 decades of American horror, you can definitely see there's more of a leaning into independent girls who are not just there for bait for the eventual killer. It's somebody who's resourceful, somebody who can who can take care of themselves, and it's an inversion on the final girl tropes that American audiences became so used to with these slasher films of the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm. However, I would say that, to build up on what you said, and also to come back to my point, Hollow seems to be very much like, because of, you can say, let's just call it a dissonance, really. Like, the characterization or the vision overall is a little bit too alienating to Vietnamese audiences. But with that mindset, no, with that feature, let's just call it that. It seems like the film, the creative vision behind Hollow seems to very much had placed faith or placed certain kind of like investment into the fact that, maybe this film is a Vietnamese kind of horror, but then I wholeheartedly believe that I can include certain elements, or I can show certain elements in a way that will also be appealing to audiences beyond Vietnam as well.
Right. I
So,
yeah. Yeah. And
so again, going back to the go for broke aspect of it, it's just like,
yeah.
that's commendable. If it does, if that is what the vision has always been all along, I'm not sure. I guess I have to try and meet Anham to discuss, but we'll see. Maybe one day I'll get the answer, and then I'll let you know as well, if you're interested.
No, I mean, I absolutely loved all 3 of these films. I love discovering all 3 of these films. And it's like all 3 of these films engaged me and entertained me in a way that I was I don't want to say I was pleasantly surprised by, but I was not necessarily expecting to. When they first started off, I wasn't quite sure. I didn't quite know how I was going to feel by the end, but by the end, I was fully on board with what they were doing, regardless of what I feel about some aspects of it along the way. And I mean, with we're going back to Victor Vu with Vengeful Heart, and immediately right off the top of the bat, decade later, you can tell that over the decades since Spirits, his storytelling and his filmmaking is infinitely more polished than it was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, you telling me the filmmaking conditions in which he made Spirits, that makes all the sense in the world. That his filmmaking would be much more polished and more, and would look like there's more muscle behind it. And I definitely, I love that. You know, there's a similar, in a way, there's a very similar style, I think, between both Hollow and Vengeful Heart. Maybe it's because they both came out the same year, 2014. But you know, and to your point, meant earlier when we started in on these films, they're both movies that basically upend the patriarchy in their own way, and I think that's one of the things that's interesting about this one. So Vengeful Heart, we start with an car accident that occurs, and a woman dies, and then a husband is waiting for his wife who's having a heart transplant. And we come to find that there's a connection between the two. And I will say, you know, sort of like what you were talking about with Hollow, it's like I love the way this movie builds in how it unravels the information here. Because, you know, once you see the wife, you know, feel like she's led to the dead woman's grave, you can kind of get an impression of where it's going from there. And then it goes somewhere completely different. But the fact that involves the family of the dead woman and how that involves the family of the dead woman is part of the fascination of that. And this is really more of a mystery than anything. And this movie had so many wonderful twists and turns in the film that I really, you know, it's not as heavy necessarily in terms of subject matter, in terms of some of the things that it brings up, but it does also have those moments that just leave you unsettled, especially as the film progresses and we start to really learn the truth about what's going on here.
Right. And the fact that Vengeful Heart, it was the most, I'm not just saying one of, it was the most successful film in Vietnam box office in 2014. It raked in massive numbers, and then it was for a while it was the only kind of film that people could talk about. And you know, I find it interesting that you say that when you said that, you know, it's you feel like this is more of a mystery more than anything. Doesn't that just, you know, just validate what I have to say about, you know, sometimes by operating within limitations in order to get a product made, in order to get a horror film made, what you end up might be a very good thriller as opposed to like straight up horror.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
So, but I feel like Vengeful Heart, it is worth talking about because even with that notion in mind, it seems to have discovered a really good balance between the two, so that, you know, even though at the end of the day it may be more mystery than horror to certain audiences, especially to your perspective, but then I just thought that, you know, it works. It works either way. Mm-hmm. And also, in terms of the script, instead of unlike Spirit or Hollow, Vengeful Heart is an adaptation of a play, and that play, the play itself, was also very famous in Vietnam. So if I have to put on my film critic hat for this, I would say that the narrative backbone of Vengeful Heart is the strongest out of the three, because for a very simple reason, because the material isn't original, because the material is actually an adaptation.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So it has a much more solid foundation than the other two, because the other two, as I've mentioned before, the filmmaker has to navigate the limitations of the filmmaking at the same time as they have to try to nourish their creative vision. But then for Vengeful Heart, maybe they don't have to do that so much because their backbone is already strong.
Right.
And also I think there's a character. There's a character. He's a montagnard, and I think he's the caretaker of the mansion in Vengeful Heart. He's the comedic element in the film.
Yeah.
So he's actually the director and the writer of the play.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see, we have really talented and creative people. They are just not operating in an environment where they can flex all their creative muscles in the best way possible. I think that's the best way that I can say it.
Yeah. No, I definitely. No, I mean you can see some of the limitations, but at the same time, I mean you can also see, you can see why this movie would have been so popular because of the fact that it's not only is it a very exceedingly well made movie, but it is also very entertaining. You've got those moments of humor, and I think especially when you get introduced to the family of the dead woman, and the husband is not quite sure what to make of things, and he's not sure that they should be sticking around, and his jealousy comes out, and I think there's a degree of that is very entertaining to see, but at the same time you also are like, okay, when's the other shoe going to drop, and what's that other shoe going to be? And it basically becomes, well, solving the murder is going to be the thing that, this is why she's been driven to or inspired to come here. But the way that we realize, oh wow, this is not the murder mystery that we thought we were investigating, and there's further twists. It's just, like you said, the narrative aspect of it is very strong, and it gets a little ridiculous. I'm not gonna lie, it gets a little ridiculous, but at the same time, each one of these films has a moment that I think just is intended to shake you when you realize the implications of what this means. And I think in Spirit, Only Child, I think, is that moment. In Hollow, it's the reveal of how sleazy the stepfather is. In Vengeful Heart, it is the realization of where the supposed dead woman has been this entire time and what really happened. And in that way, I mean, if you want to, it kind of remind me, it's weird because of the fact that, part of the reason why I'm bringing up American films and part of the reason I'm bringing up other films is to give listeners a context to where my mind is going, as far as like, if you felt a certain way about this film wait until you watch this film because I think it's going to shock you in similar ways. It kind of the twists in this one in a way remind me of Don't Breathe, and the twist at that one. Now, granted, it's not nearly as unsettling, but in terms of the way that it subverts your expectations as to, oh, you feel empathy for this one person. Oh, maybe I shouldn't feel as empathetic as I thought. And I love when filmmakers are able to do that and do that successfully. And I think there's a really great example of that here.
Nice. Nice. I'm glad that, I'm glad you have that viewpoint. And also, because right. I think this is also a good place for me to mention that, uh from the jealousy from the jealousy that you can see in the film, especially from I think the husband.
Yeah.
I've always had a hard time determining whether it's just a long-term boyfriend or it's a husband, but I think it's a husband. For the husband of our main female character, he is, from there's humor in the film.
Yeah.
And again, it allows for scarier things to happen because, it in a way, yes, it dampens certain revelations, it dampens certain horrific elements, but then that is the only way that they can be in the film.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean that dynamic is so important to the film, I think. The fact that it's like, and you do get the impression over the course of the movie that they're a younger couple, that they probably have just started their life together, and they're thrown into this very heavy situation of not only her, having to get a heart transplant, but also being thrown in this situation where they start to have visions, and it puts them into this situation that, how do you react in this situation? It's like, these people are convinced that you're almost the reincarnated spirit of their lost, the person that they lost. How are you going to react to that? And so you're going to have some moments that are you just don't know how to react, and you going to make the best of it as you can. And sometimes humor is the only way to do it. And sometimes, and I do love the vein of humor in this film because of the fact that it does help humanize, I think, this situation in a way that is important to the overall film, especially given how dark it gets by the end.
Right. And yeah, I do agree with that too. As in, like, this is a good example of, okay, I know that a lot of people, they want their horror experience to be free of humor, which is valid. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but here, Vengeful Heart is a good example of humor being like, it adds to the experience as opposed to subtracts it.
Yeah.
Even it's subtle enough, and it was delivered fleeting enough so that it's just there. It made an impression, and then it's out. As opposed to, it appears, it comes in, and then it just takes the wheel.
Yeah.
It just assumes captain of the ship, and then it just runs with it.
Yeah.
And a lot, actually, we have a lot of examples where it doesn't have to be horror films even that do that, where because there are so many limitations and restrictions to what can be shown at the time, it was just like okay, we gotta integrate a humorous element in here, and we gotta let it to steer the ship, direct the whole experience all the way to the end. So sometimes it makes for a very frustrating film going experience for me here, because I love to tell you all more about Vietnamese cinema, but then this is just not a good enough example because of that
Yeah.
tonal whiplash. But here for Vengeful Heart, I can say it, I can recommend it without any hesitation, because it does introduce some stranger keys, uh, more notes that are quote unquote inconsistent with the overall mood of the situation, it but then it knows that I am and I should behave in a way so that I am adding and I'm a part of the experience, as opposed to someone who is going to come in and then just pull the rug from under everyone and all the spotlights on me kind of deal, So yeah.
I feel like this is a great way to close this discussion. I feel like I've learned so much in the past couple of hours talking to you, and this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted to get to know more about Vietnamese cinema, get to know from somebody who is so passionate about it, and
Mm-hmm.
to be able to talk about these films, which I really was surprised by in a lot of ways, but also was very engaged by and very captivated by. It really made each one was its own unique, rich experience, and I think that was one of the things that impressed me the most, because you can't necessarily always say that about horror. Like I won't I could never watch Halloween a lot of Halloween movies or a lot of Friday 13th movies and say, "Oh, that was a rich experience." It's like, no, it's not that at all. I mean, even other horror movies, it's like, no, it's just a horror movie. Um, so I want to close this first of all by thanking you for being a guest, and I'm so glad that we were finally able to have this conversation. And also, I wanted to, if you could recommend, if not, what do I want to say? If you were given one thing to say to recommend to somebody who was curious about Vietnamese cinema,
Okay.
what would you say to pitch, I guess, for lack of a better word, Vietnamese cinema?
Oh, okay. Um, I would say that why should you watch Vietnamese cinema? Why should you be curious about it? Okay, I got it. Because it's very simple. Because there are certain cinema scenes where you get to say that, oh, I love that country cinema scene. Oh, I don't really like that country cinema scene. So, but you can, as in like, you can comment on it, as in like, do you have an affinity toward it, or you don't? But Vietnamese cinema, I feel it, while we talk about it, it for some reason it manages to find a third way, a third option to that. nobody knows about it. So you can't really comment on the fact that, oh, I like Vietnamese cinema, or like, I don't like Vietnamese cinema. You tend to always say that, oh, Vietnam has a cinema. And to me, that is even worse than hearing that Vietnamese cinema is not for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you don't even know that it exists,
Yeah.
or that you haven't even been aware of it. So I just, so, to phrase it differently, you should check out Vietnamese cinema scene for a very simple reason. It's just that because it's there. It has always been present. It is not a myth. It is hard to reach, but not completely out of reach, if that makes sense. So, you know, and yeah, the fact that many, many more filmmakers now local filmmakers, they are realizing now that their creative work can actually go beyond local borders. But this is a two-way street, or like a two-party effort kind of thing. And by saying that, I mean let's just say the new wave of creatives here, they can make a film that will go abroad. But I think that they will be in a safer position, or in a more encouraging position, when they realize that once they have created their artwork, somebody on the other side is going to meet them in the middle and pick them up to go the rest of the way. So right now, there has been a lot of Vietnamese filmmakers willing to meet in the middle, but then most of the responses have been silence, because mostly, for the very simple reason that I've mentioned before, they are not aware that Vietnam can produce creative work. And that is very far from the truth. So, that's why you should check out Vietnamese cinema, because we have been present. We have always been there. But it's just that so let's just say that if cinema is a barbecue gathering, we would always show up late because we have never received an invite.
That I mean, and honestly,
But at the same time, we are waiting for one. We have been waiting for one.
Right.
So yeah.
But honestly, I mean, that is really the only. I think that is the only rational, reasonable answer for that, is that it's there, it's available, or I mean, even or it's around to be taken in. And I mean, I am always a strong proponent of people moving outside of their comfort zone when it comes to film, and watching something that they may not have necessarily expected to enjoy, or even realize existed. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on here and talk about this, because of the fact that I'm not as familiar with this. So it's educating me, but hopefully this conversation educates others and gets people interested in Vietnamese cinema, and not just these three films, but the larger breadth of the Vietnamese cinema scene in general.
And also, I'll take this opportunity to be frank as well. Is Vietnamese cinema currently at a position where, you folks can call it like quality, or have as much competitive edge as, say, Japanese or Korean cinema? No, we're not. Like, they're literally, to borrow a lyric from a very popular Black Eyed Peas song. They are in 3008. We're still 2008. So, but at the same time, I feel that a lot of in a lot of ways, we are lagging and we are laggers because of the barbecue
Mm-hmm.
invite analogy.
Getting the invite, yeah,
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 exactly. So you have to show interest in you have to express your interest in us a little bit, and you have to understand that we are lagging behind in order to have us feel that, oh shoot, we're kind of slow, aren't we? So that we can propel ourselves forward
yeah.
because we keep getting invites from 3008, just so
Mm-hmm.
that we can open ourselves up to the fact that, oh crap, we are actually in still way behind 2008. So we should raise our standards a little bit faster, and do things a little bit better. Because right
Yeah.
now, because we haven't received any invitation, we we progress by inches instead of by miles. And well, but I believe that an invite goes a long way.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's like it is a responsibility of film goers to keep film going. I mean, it really is. I mean, the to your point, the filmmakers can only take it a certain way. They can make the films, but then it's the audience's responsibility to experience the films and to let the filmmakers know we have seen you, we want to see more from you. And I mean that is the most important responsibility of a film goer is to actually watch the films that are made and to experience the films that are made and it's important to us to challenge ourselves to watch films that may be out of our comfort zone or make us uncomfortable or come from someplace that we're not as familiar with, and we should be. We really should be, because I mean the
Yeah, I
world of
mean,
cinema is the world. So
exactly. I mean, it's just logical, because we are creatives, and specifically, we are in the sense of we can comment on creativity. So, dang it, be curious,
yeah.
stay curious,
Mm-hmm.
be just go ahead and explore, because I mean, how did Korean cinema or Korean entertainment in general gets its due today? Because people were curious, because people were willing to explore. How did people know about Indonesian horror, which is at the moment, a very, let's just say, a very hot potato kind of thing, like a good looking
Mm-hmm.
potato.
Yeah.
Well, from what I mean by hot, like a very good looking potato in among horror writers right now, because people were curious, because people were willing to explore. And Korea and Indonesia, I feel that they respond to that by realizing that, oh shoot, there's an invite for us. People are actually interested in what we do. Dang it, we should be better, right? Yeah, I think we totally should. So, you know, that's why they get to where they are. They get to be at the tip of people's tongues, because there is interest.
Mm-hmm.
So, and because that happened to Korean cinema, that happened to Indonesian cinema, why can't that happen to Vietnamese cinema?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I, I mean, not too unreasonable of a request, I believe.
No, no, not at all. Not at
Yeah.
all. Uh, well, when thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Before we go, if you would like to just say where you can be found online, where some of your writing can be found online.
Yes, I totally can. So on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. By the way, I refuse to call it by its new name. So Yeah, I mean, you can have at me, but whatever. Anyway, so on social media, I am the Viet who Viet is it's TheVietWhoviet. That's if you're curious, that's actually a bilingual wordplay because Viet in Vietnam is Vietnamese for right. So actually, my handle, my social media handle, all of them, if I have to translate them, is like the Vietnamese who writes. But yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah. I know it's punny, right? Yeah. And where can you find me? Well, right now I do admit that I bounce around a lot. But most recently, I would say that you can find me on rogerebert.com. That I just had an article on there, so it's been amazing. It's incredible, but but we'll talk more about that later. And where I'm also at, I am well right now since I'm in Vietnam. You can find me on bilingual publications here in Vietnamese, published in Vietnamese and English. They are called Saigoneer and Vietcetera. So, but I haven't stopped working with publications in the US as well. All of them are very good friends of mine. Shout out to all of them. For example, like the people at Awards Watch or Fangoria, sometimes Slash Films or Texas Observer. So yeah, told you I bounce around a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, and I know it was the Roger Ebert thing. You just got published on Roger Ebert, and I know you were extremely excited. I can't wait to read that. It's about Chenwu Park's Stoker, which is one of
Yes.
his most underappreciated films because it is a fantastic film. I haven't seen it in a decade. I need to rewatch it. Um, but when thank you so much for being on here, and it was an absolute pleasure.
No, I think I'm the one who should be thanking you for, for letting me be on here. It's just, yeah, it's just, it's always nice to discover that there are actually people who are still curious about Vietnamese cinema, as they should. But also, not only that, but they are those same curious souls. Are also, they also host a platform where I can demonstrate, we can demonstrate that curiosity as well. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You. Yes.
I'd like to thank Wen for joining me on the podcast, and like I said, that was a discussion that was a long time coming, and I am grateful to be able to have a platform for somebody like him to bring not only his positivity, but to bring his knowledge of a subject that I'm not as knowledgeable about, and to share that with you guys. That's going to be it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema podcast. Join us next time. The rest of this year is probably going to be pretty light, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And thank you very much. As always, check out patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. You can now follow for free and get some select content for free to see if you're interested in subscribing financially. You can also check out Bandcamp for my musical work, as well as always Sonic Cinema at www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much.